Welcome back. So this is our last panel of the day, and this is a great one. Evolving Threat Actor TTPs, a deep dive into the technical techniques and tactics being utilized today. And we have a perfect panel for this. First, we have Shelley Giesbrecht, Director of Incident Response at CrowdStrike. Shelley is an experienced IT security professional with a focus on security operations, incident response, digital forensics, and network security. So welcome, Shelley. Welcome back, Shelley. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you.
And Chris Cwalina is our moderator. He's a partner at Norton Rose, based in Washington, D.C. Chris is the global co-head of data protection, privacy, and cybersecurity. He concentrates his international practice on cybersecurity and privacy compliance and program development. Chris, I'm really glad to have you moderating this panel, and let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, Bruce. Really appreciate it. Great to be here. So what we wanted to do today is we wanted to get a little bit more technical and get in the weeds a bit. Companies who have major incidents that we represent, they all have cyber programs in place, some to a greater or lesser extent, but most of the time, companies that get hit, we find, security was not an afterthought. They have security tools in place. They have monitoring detection capabilities, vulnerability management programs, asset management, identity. It's true for sure, and Shelley knows this too. It's true that there are differences among levels of maturity amongst the clients and industries we represent. But it's equally true that when we do root cause analyses post-incident, and not just how they initially got in, which we're going to talk about, but also how they accomplished their mission. We find that there was often not one, but multiple times during an attack path where the TA could have been stopped. Sometimes we see, we see a number of things. Sometimes we see failure to appropriately handle and triage alerting that occurred. Sometimes we see third-party MSSPs who do not appropriately escalate or timely escalate. Sometimes alerts are deemed false positives, and they were not false positives. Sometimes we see tickets get closed. Prior tickets aren't matched up with other ticket activity when they should have been, or tickets get closed when they shouldn't have been. Sometimes we see activity that the threat actor took in the environment that should have alerted, but didn't. Perhaps the rule wasn't correct. The point is a number of things, but more often than not, the point is that alerts are there. Or the attacker is taking steps in the environment where there is no alert, which we'll talk about that too. The point is that, because we see this a lot, where there are multiple opportunities to stop the attack before the TA's mission is accomplished, we wanted to have a dialogue about that. And I'm here with one of the experts in this field, Shelley with CrowdStrike. This topic isn't simple. SOCs, security operations centers, whether they're external, whether they're internal, they have the hardest job in show business. Their jobs often complicated by poor IT hygiene, poor IT management, as well as poor visibility and logging, and that often doesn't have much to do with the security team or what the security team wants. They deal with the cards that they are dealt. But what we wanted to talk about today is the TTPs, the tactics, the techniques that are being used today, what CrowdStrike is seeing, because they live this day in and day out, and what are the alerting detection issues that are occurring. What all the things that I just said. Let's talk about each one of them. So, Shelley, I'm going to start off with, what you're seeing today, and at a high level. I mean, we'll get specific right out of the gates, because in the past few months, Scattered Spider has made a lot of headlines, and they've gone after. It seems like they are a TA group that is growing on steroids for some reason. They are financially motivated, obviously. Their goal is to extort companies. But as we talk about first, so tell us about your scattered spider, and sort of two questions to tee you up. First is, are you seeing groups like scattered spider deploy techniques that are more akin to the APTs that are out there? Are they blending a little bit blending, or what is your point of view on that? And then we'll talk specifically about scattered spider TTPs specifically, just because they're so prominent today. But first, the first question: are you seeing a blend of the financially motivated actors and the APT groups?
I think the answer to that lies a little bit in between. I think what we've seen is ransomware groups. So at CrowdStrike, we use cryptonyms for threat actors. The nation state based actors are names like Chinese Nexus actors, we call pandas. Russian state actors or supported actors we call bears. And the financially or e-crime actors we call spiders. So I'm going to throw in a few of those as we're talking. But I think what we've seen with the spider groups is kind of a maturing, if you will, over the last 2 years, where the techniques were much louder, very not concerned about being seen, just in and out, sort of that break in, break out. Whereas with your APT, your nation state actors that are more sophisticated, flying under the radar a lot more. So we're much more adept at using native tools, using the tools that come with the operating system, tools that are in place, as well as bringing custom tools with them that perhaps, not just using zero-day exploits, but actually bringing custom malware with them that really flew under the radar for a lot of detection tools because they just didn't have detections for them. And I think what we're seeing now is, particularly with Scattered Spider, is a move towards a much more adeptness with some of those native tools, good sysadmin skills, being able to utilize what's there and move very quickly and knowledgeably through networks in a way that we haven't seen with spider groups previously. And I think that's where we're seeing a little bit of a coming together with those two groups. In a sense, we're just seeing that maturing, unfortunately, if you will, of the spider groups and more use of tactics maybe perhaps we've seen in the past from APT groups that had a little bit more sophistication.
And that's consistent with what we're seeing, which is a lot of times now the financially motivated groups are taking more time before they, we'll see them have entry points farther back than, we still see a lot of the financial groups that come in and come out very quickly, just within a couple of days, they accomplish their mission. But we're also seeing more of a blended and more sophisticated activity query. Are these folks moonlighting? What are they? But the point is that the techniques are starting they are starting to become more sophisticated. The financially motivated guys aren't as loud as they historically were, which makes it just more challenging for the good guys. Talk about Scattered Spider TTP specifically. One of the things that our clients are often, we've made a lot of headway with MFA on external facing access. But Scattered Spider is well aware of that and focused on getting around it. What do you specifically with the Scattered Spider type groups or groups of that ilk? How are they getting around things like MFA?
Yeah, this is Scattered Spider is a group we've been probably working, with for about the last 18 months ish, and very, very busy group. And where they really started, where they came from, is exploiting organizations that had access to information about other organizations, like telecommunication companies, BPO. And what that allowed them to do is use that information for things like social engineering, and for SIM swapping. So if we think about how we use MFA in a lot of organizations, right? We put in our password, and then we get prompted for MFA, and a lot of organizations are using SMS-based MFA. So it sends us a code, we put it in, and away we go. Well, what happens if your SMS code doesn't come to your phone anymore? It goes somewhere else. And that's what we're seeing with scattered spider and SIM swapping, is they're actually able to sort of take over somebody's phone number and get that SMS code that was supposed to go to the actual user. And so in addition to that, we're also seeing a very high level of social engineering happening to help that. So time and time again, with the organizations that we've worked with regards to scattered spider, we're seeing a fairly sophisticated social engineering take place to their help desks, getting password resets, registering new devices in MFA, but also using self-service password reset portals, etc., to those means to use those means as well. Additionally, obviously, things like just allowing legacy authentication, not having accounts that shouldn't have MFA allowed. So a test account should never, have the ability to set up MFA, let alone have that MFA invitation sort of left open, if you will, MFA registration left open. We've seen that exploited as well. But then we get down to just plain phishing, right? Using phishing emails to get individuals to enter their password and their SMS prompts, and going directly in that way. So there's unfortunately, MFA is great, but it's not infallible. And usually the point is either improper configuration or the human endpoint, right? It's what we do with that information, and ultimately that ends up being the weakest link sometimes.
Well, what are you advising clients to do? Well, yeah, and what are you advising clients to do on that stuff? So on the technical side, like, are you advising, move away from the SMS push? Are you,
yes.
do you have any on either on the site social engineering or on the implementation? What are the sort of recommendations there?
I think from a social engineering perspective, we want to make sure with our help desks that we have a really strong authentication method in place for making sure that the person on the phone is the person that they say that they are. So that may mean making sure that, for instance, they come on camera and they actually will, say, this is who I am, and being able to say match that to their employee photo within your global address list or intranet, for instance. Some sort of reasonably strong method to be able to make sure that that person is who they say that they are. The other piece, of course, from an MFA perspective, is making sure that it's the solid choice. SMS is probably at this point, just based on the fact that SIM swapping and other things are in place, is sort of one of the least secure ways to do that. We would recommend going to something like number matching, which you can do with Azure, with a number of other tools, as well as sort of going back to hardware authentication via the YubiKey, for instance, is another way that some organizations are going for particularly more privileged users.
And that's what you guys use, right? You guys use,
yes.
You guys are using a physical hardware, like the old score. Some tokens were like the or RSEC tokens, or the so that's what we're saying too, and particularly on that authentication stuff, because it's not just these type of actors that are circumventing authentication. It's also
absolutely
the IT worker scam that's occurring. That's how they're getting around, because they're not getting properly vetted and authenticated. But well, sticking with that's helpful, and it's we're advising our clients too to move away from the SMS stuff. So hopefully, folks listening to that start pushing for that themselves internally. So let's walk through sort of attack path. And I mean, we did a little bit already on initial attack vector with scattered spider, but I wanted to break it out into initial attack vector, privilege escalation, lateral movement, malware deployment, and then ultimately data theft and accomplishing their mission. I kind of wanted to break down in each section because, again, going back to what I said at the top, in each one of these sort of parts of the mission, we see alerts that are happening or should be happening, an opportunity to detect and stop, and that's just not occurring. And that's what I wanted to talk about. So first, outside of what we just hit with scattered and the social engineering, what are you seeing mainly in terms of initial point of entry? What do you see?
Obviously, besides what we're seeing with scattered spider and the social engineering, et cetera, and so forth, I think in the last year we've really seen a lot of exploitation of vulnerabilities that we've seen out there. Netscaler and the Netscaler ADC gateway vulnerability has and will continue to be. We sort of every time one of those comes up, we see a flurry of cases. Threat actor Bitwise Spider, for instance, earlier this year was using one of the Netscaler vulnerabilities, and essentially what that was being able to remote authenticated connect to a machine that would be from remotely unauthenticated and allow hijacking existing sessions. So once you're able to hijack an existing session, then you're a legitimate user and you're able to move in a normal way on the network.
Well, point about detecting that right there, right? Like that's a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely, a huge challenge. And unfortunately, with vulnerabilities like that, that's a tough one unless there's a patch, right? So once we generally speaking don't hear about those until we have a few cases in the queue, then we get that patch. And obviously Citrix is doing all they can to get those patches out as quickly as possible to customers. But unfortunately, we do get those cases that come in before. And then obviously, let's talk about the fact that sometimes we don't get patching done in time, right? So even though there's a patch available, folks aren't patching. Or, I think frequently we see with customers, they go, oh, there's a Netscaler over there that we didn't know about that we didn't patch. And it's the one over there in the corner that nobody, or it's a test device, or it's in a branch office, or what have you that didn't get patched, that isn't part of the regular patching cycle, and then all of a sudden, they've got that hole that they sort of didn't know about, which a lot comes down to sort of technical debt, which is a huge piece. I think also we're seeing, like for instance, early this year, we saw MOVEit vulnerabilities. That was May, June timeframe. We saw the file transfer software MOVEit being there's a sort of multiple vulnerabilities all in one place that a threat actor called Graceful Spider was able to put together to sort of in a sort of non-trivial exploit chain, really, but able to then gain access to environments for data exfiltration and et cetera. So earlier last year, there was some Mitel, telephony platform that there was, I think, 2 to 3 vulnerabilities. Actually, one of my team members was actually found them and reported them to Mitel. And they were able to patch those. But we were seeing that exploited as well by a threat actor named Shining Spider. So a lot of use of vulnerabilities as they come out, and the constant use of those to get initial access into the environments. But we're still seeing things really like just OpenRDP, single factor authentication, legacy authentication methods. If for instance with cloud platforms, if POP3, IMAP are still available, it's an easy way without MFA. It's an easy way into the environment. And of course, last but not least, just really brute force attacks are still in play. It's noisy. It's not necessarily the easiest way to get in, but it's still in play, and it's still very much seen on a regular basis.
Well, getting in seems to be more of the easy part in my view, and harder for the security team. I mean, the security teams are never going to be able to stop that. And vulnerability management, technical debt that you mentioned, supply chain, stuff it gets into the point of what can the security teams actually do? I mean, yeah, patching, often because the security team isn't actually the ones doing the patching; they're the ones saying, "Hey, we got to patch." So we're definitely not going to solve the root cause of initial point of entry, but they've got to move from there. So they've got to move from that initial point. They get creds, They escalate privileges. So how are they doing that? So how are the threat actors doing that? And what do you see? What are their methods?
So I think a lot of threat actors are coming in with legitimate credentials, which that's a question I get asked on a regular basis, which is how do they get that initial set of credentials? And sometimes the truth is that we just don't know. We have a whole ecosystem of threat actors out there, including sort of a group, if you will, of access brokers. So their sole job is to get credentials into a network, find that one ingress in, and then they just sell it. So they don't want to do anything else. That is simply their job, is to, hey, I have access to a network that their network is this, they do this, who wants it? And they sell that. Recently a case, we saw initial access several months before we saw the actual access used. And likely there, we're talking about an access broker. Somebody got the access here, sold it on, and it was used several months later to do the actual malicious actions. And we still see old standards, once they're in, you see, Mimikatz, secret stump being used to dump out hashes, dump out passwords, etc. And then we see tools like AD Explorer, AD Recon, just using LDAP to query the environment. PowerShell obviously being used a lot for enumeration, and plain old net commands, net.exe, net1.exe on Windows to do reconnaissance. Recently, I saw and very, very frequently used Bloodhound to map the network. So Bloodhound's a great tool for how do I get from regular account to a domain admin account, and it'll show you the easiest path to get there. Fantastic,
Shelley,
great tool.
But Shelley, on all those things that you just rattled off, which are all things that we've seen in cases and with cases with you, so AD Explorer, LDAP, PowerShell, Bloodhound, Mimikatz, like what of these should be alerting? Like so that's a laundry list right there. Like should they, because PowerShell is, like how do you what of those things do you see when you see, like, how did that not get detected? I guess maybe start with the face palm. Like what do you think should be?
Well, obviously, anything like Mimikatz should be, that should be a signature detection, should be fairly easy with any good EDR tool these days. That should be seeing that right away. Tools like the difference with things like PowerShell using just net commands, using an LDAP query is they can be easily mistaken for regular sysadmin work, right? So that's a difficult part with a lot of EDR tools, is that we need to balance out, what's every day with making the console go off like a Christmas tree for actual true positives, if you will. So that's a tough thing. And so that's kind of, again, where the human element comes in, having folks actually threat hunting through the data, understanding what that looks like, but also I think identity-based protection. So usually speaking, the accounts that are doing this type of activity aren't the accounts that should be doing that activity. So they might be a service account. They might be a highly privileged account that normally does something over here, but shouldn't be doing this on this server at this time. So understanding, sort of that user behavior and being able to detect and prevent from that perspective is very important.
Like service accounts, are you seeing those used a lot? What are you guys recommending people do better from a privileged access management standpoint? So
I think service accounts are a huge problem in organizations. One, because it sort of speaks again to that technical debt that I'm talking about. A lot of organizations that have been in existing for tens of years, if not more, have these service accounts that were set up. And I think frequently when we set up service accounts, we say, well, we don't know exactly what permissions it needs, so just give it all the permissions. So all of a sudden we have these highly privileged service accounts that are able to basically do anything on any server, for instance, in the environment. But did they really need that access? So understanding what appropriate access is, understanding what the accounts are and where they're used. I think frequently, for instance, when we see that a service account was compromised in a breach, we say, well, that needs to be reset. you're going to need to reset that. And generally speaking, one of our big recommendations is enterprise-wide password reset. And the service accounts are always the pain point, because more frequently than not, an organization will say, we don't know everything that service account does.
Right.
And if we reset it, it will break things.
Yeah. That's what we always hear. And we always hear that, actually, in every case. And I know let me shift gears actually to malware. It was similar, but malware deployment, and how do you detect that? So like, hypothetical for you, not hypothetical, a real, on Linux, on ESXi's threat actor deployed from 2 Windows systems. They used WinSCP to transfer the encryptor over to the ESXi. And then they used PuTTY to SSH into it to execute. On Windows, they deployed it manually via RDP and PSExec with a preset list. So what are you supposed to do there? Like, so that's that. So because people often ask us, Shelley, like we'll say like, well, okay, they get in, and how the heck do they deploy the ransomware? Why is it always that companies don't, that companies that get hit with that don't detect it until they run into operational issues? Like, but why isn't the deployment of the malware itself, and should it raise alerts?
I mean, ESXi is difficult because, of course, to my knowledge, there is no EDR or antivirus tool that can be deployed to ESXi hosts. So when ransomware is actually deployed on the ESXi server itself, there's really no way for detecting that. So once it's on there and deployed, we're encrypting guests at their root, essentially. So it's kind of game over at that point, and that's very, very difficult. The other thing that we've seen frequently in the last little while is threat actors looking for systems that don't have protection on them. So once they're in the network, they're going to look for that one system, that couple of systems that don't have an EDR or an antivirus tool on them, and deploy.
Should that scanning that they're doing, looking for that, should that trigger alarms?
Theoretically, yes, absolutely. If we're using tools like network scanning and whatnot, again, it depends. The answer is that it depends, because it's that balance between normal work, because system administrators, network administrators use network scanning tools all the time. So there's that balance between being able to detect and having too many false positives in the console. So it depends. But I think understanding what tools you use in your environment and tuning for that, and not allowing the things that you don't use, I think is an important point that for tuning your detections in the environment.
Well, Bruce should have given us more time on our topic, because we haven't even gotten close to where I wanted to get to. But let me move to data theft, because here's something I want to go to: data theft, because everybody cares about it for obvious reasons. And pre-incident, when we're talking to companies, they're like, oh, well, large amounts of data could never get out of our systems, and that's not going to happen here. And we have DLP in place, or we're monitoring the firewalls, or what have you. But of course, that's not the case. DLP is not going to stop threat actors from getting data out the door, and they're able to get it out in large quantities, relatively fast as the pipe will let it go out. So how are they doing it? How are you seeing the different methods for the threat actors taking data out?
Well, I think I want to start by saying that I'm not a DLP expert, but what I know about DLP is it's incredibly complex to do it right. And I think that's one of those things where you need to know where all the data is. You need to know where all the data comes in and out from. And you need to know all of your ingress and egress points. And so we're still seeing, honestly, we're still seeing it go out via, collection via rclone, upload to file transfer sites. And I think that's a difficult one too, because for every file transfer site we think we know about, there's 10 more that we don't. Right. And I remember a case where we came in after the fact. We saw the rclone that collected the data. We saw the strings. We knew what had left, but we couldn't figure out how it had left. And we actually ended up coming with a file transfer site that we found it completely randomly in the evidence, and none of us had ever heard of it before. So how do you protect against something that you had no idea existed? But we're also seeing, a lot of use of cloud platforms. So S3 buckets, OneDrive, etc. The things that organizations allow because it's part of their business. That's a difficult thing as well, because I think cloud platforms, and if I was going to stand on a little bit of a soapbox, are still sort of the Wild West. They are implemented and are becoming a huge part of what we do every day. A lot of companies are almost cloud native these days. But at the same time, I think we still have a lot of work to do around security configuration, understanding what that looks like, and making sure that those pieces are secure. The threat actors are much more fluid between cloud and on-prem these days, and we need to do that as well as defenders.
Bruce, do I have time for just one more question for Shelley?
Briefly, please. Yeah.
Real briefly, Shelley, but no pressure here. I just wanted you to wrap it up. I didn't get to any of I didn't get to a lot of what I wanted to talk about. But what should companies be? When you come in, what is the prime thing that companies should focus on? Is it visibility? What do you say is the number one thing? I know that's a tough question to ask, but just to wrap it up, what would you say given the sophistication of threat actors?
I'm going to say visibility and detection capability. So a good EDR tool, some sort of protection against identity-based attacks, and good logging, but not just good logging. Having that eyes on glass, because while nice logs for me as a historical investigator is fantastic, unless you're using your current logging to look for the bad things that are going on in your environment, then they're not helping you. So I think for me, those are probably the three big things right now.
And I'll just emphasize, Bruce, with this closing remark is we see our security teams that we work with all the time, and they are clamoring for more visibility, more logging. They don't have it. They can't detect and stop what they don't see. So that's what we all should be supporting our security teams and getting is more visibility and logging, irrespective of the cost that is incurred. So Bruce, with that, I will, Shelley, thank you so much. I wish we
Thank you.
And Bruce, back over to you.
Thank you, Chris and Shelley. Yeah, terrific job. Thank you again to both of you for joining us. Just real briefly, let me thank the 12 world-class law firms and consulting firms that were represented here today as sponsors and supporters of the event. And thank you to everybody for being with us. I hope we will see you again soon. And until next time, thank you.